More predictions about more jobs ending from AI leaders, this time from Dario Amodei of Anthropic. And we look at why you still have to code, why coding hasn't ended, even though it was predicted a year ago that it would be ending now, that there would be no more coding happening. Well, that's just not true. We'll look at that as well. But we're going to talk about how it is true that AI is very, very powerful. Let's dive into these things and let's talk about all the news coming out with AI recently and what actually matters. This is where we try to help you stay on track with what's going on in AI, focusing on what you actually need to know, being able to mute all of the shenanigans in the space and actually focus on what's a threat to you, what's an opportunity to you, how can you take advantage, and what do you need to actually know with all the AI news that's happening. So let's dive into it. I'm your host, Ishai, and let's get into the show. So today I want to start with a prediction from Dario Amodei talking about how 50% of entry-level lawyers, consultants, and finance professionals will be completely wiped out in the next 1 to 5 years. Well, not very long ago, 1 year ago, he made the claim that there would be no coding in about 12 months. March 11, 2025, he said in 12 months, AI will write 100% of all code. Now, that's not true. I mean, yes, AI and especially Claude Code is writing a lot of code, but if you're developing a product, you still have to write code and you still have to edit the code, understand the code, and figure out if anything's broken, why it's happening, QA everything. There's still a lot of work for a developer to do. So I think a lot of these predictions are a little bit hyperbole and it's a bit unclear why. I mean, the obvious answer is that these guys, and I would include Sam Altman, who says a lot of the same things as well, and even Elon Musk says many of the same things as well, that like AGI is coming for all your jobs and it's going to take over everything. A lot of these guys, part of it could be for investors, part of it could be even for their workforce, trying to motivate people, set the vision really big. But it's going to have some pullback, some pushback. The CEO of Palantir recently, I always forget this guy's name. He was saying, Alex Karp, that this is a big dumb thing that these companies are doing, where you cannot tell the world we are taking all the white collar jobs and simultaneously not play ball with the government when it comes to defense tech and things like that and expect to be able to remain as a company. Now, it sounds very dramatic when you hear that because in the US, let's look at just the US where the biggest companies from this space are, it's very unusual for a company to be regulated out of existence or whole industry to be regulated out of existence. And it would be very unusual and really unprecedented for industry of this size to be nationalized. But he makes a really good point because if these changes really are as big as these tech leaders say, if this really is an existential threat to white collar work, if there's going to be massive job displacement within the next few years and most of white collar work is going to end, if there's going to be no job opportunities for people coming out of college in these white collar industries because there's no reason to hire a junior because you just have AI do what they could do. If that is true, then this does represent a seismic shift in the entire economy and the entire social system of the capitalist system. And it's probably true that that would not be allowed. A disruption on that scale would not be allowed. So what would happen in that scenario is I think you would have a very compelling argument that AI is something like essential infrastructure, similar to electricity or water or any other infrastructure that needs to be either in the hands of the government or needs to be heavily regulated with proper licensing and enforcing certain practices. And again, that sounds like an extreme statement because very few private industries have that level of regulation unless there's a real national security issue, but this would be a real national security issue of a different sort. So I would agree with Alex Karp on that. And also, I think that these, more importantly, these sorts of claims that work is ending are very much overblown. Now, if you want to talk about the capabilities of the AI when properly deployed, when the context is managed properly, can they do the job of associates at a law firm or of any of these types of entry-level white-collar work? Absolutely. But the actual adoption of that on an industry-level scale as proper infrastructure deployed into the businesses themselves is a whole nother matter. Just because technically the model can achieve the results doesn't mean that the deployment of that in replacing the job is something that a company is going to be able to do. And here's where another possible disconnect is, because if you are leading the research of these agents, of these models, and you're seeing, wow, these models can literally perform legal work, or they score a certain rate on IQ tests. I saw the other day they're scoring, in the 140s on an IQ test. They can take a standardized test and they can do extraordinarily well. And pretty soon, probably they will do better than even the smartest graduates. But that is very different than managing the context over time and making the right inference and the right decision making and deploying the right results, because it gets messy as you work with these tools. Anybody who's had the experience of working with AI for more than a day on a project knows that when you start the project out and you give the exact right instructions into the prompt, the result is incredible. You look at it, you're like, oh my gosh, it just built me an app in one command and it's done. This would have taken me, weeks to do. But as the project goes on, it feels like the AI doesn't understand you as well as it used to. And you ask for a little change and it gets it wrong, or it deletes an entire thing that it shouldn't delete. And you start realizing as you progress, it's harder and harder. And a lot of the reason for that is really, you could call it context control. It essentially is that the AI is not injecting the right things into its prompt as it goes along. So let me break it down for you. Like if I'm talking to a human developer and they build something and I say, yeah, it feels a little bit old. I like this aspect, but I think it needs to be a little more crisp, a little more modern. If I have a good rapport with that developer, there's a good chance they're really going to understand what I'm talking about. And then they go through another iteration and they come back and I say, yeah, we discussed that the window should be bumped down a few pixels and I see that wasn't deployed. Oh, sure, I'll go ahead and go fix that. So with the human, they really understand the summary of what you're saying. And this is where AI just has a really tough problem in understanding how to piece together, multiple decision points into a comprehensive direction and execute it. And so as you scale and you work on a project, and I'm not even talking big scale, I'm talking about even just a simple project, but you're carrying it out over a few days of instructions, it has a hard time doing all the fine tuning and actually getting the result you want. And so this gets to my point, is that if you are the CEO of Anthropic or you're the head researcher of OpenAI or something like that, you're seeing the capability of the model going very, very far already, and very soon reaching the point where it's vastly outperforming on like a simple, logical, straightforward test in a lot of use cases, whether it's from legal, from data science, from coding, all sorts of things. Again, now the point though is that that is not the same thing as the ability to actually execute a project over time and understand what the specific instructions are that are changing over time and incorporate them into the larger context of what someone understands. And this is something that humans just do incredibly well with pattern recognition and their basic communication ability to just generally understand what somebody is telling us and know how to do what they're asking. So that is one possible disconnect. It might be that Dario Amodei is perfectly transparent about what he believes is being 100% genuine, honest, but he might have a blind spot because he's working on the model development and the research rather than like on deploying big things with the AI tools, for example. So I do think there's a big disconnect there. The other thing is when we look at like, let's take the example of white collar workers getting out of graduate school and being deployed into the workforce. And some of the things we're hearing is, well, they're not going to hire, legal assistants or legal associates anymore because you'll just use AI. But here's the issue. These young people tend to know and embrace AI more than all the other people. So, if I ran a law firm, I would love to hire a graduate of law school that has been using AI in depth for the past few years and really understands and knows it and can bring that knowledge into my business, especially if I've got a bunch of associates that are from previous generations that don't tend to adopt technology as quickly. So I don't see that is exactly how things are going to play out. And in fact, I feel in many ways the opposite, where what's to stop a more entrepreneurial minded law student coming out of school from opening up their own business and finding an opportunity in the market, using their legal skills, leveraging AI, and bringing on a couple of their buddies from college and launching a business. So I just don't see this existential threat of there's not going to be jobs available. I don't see that playing out. Now, I want to turn though to where I do see there being a big threat, let's say, to the existing way things are. And that has to do with software. So we're seeing a lot of discussion about how the software moat is gone. So essentially what that means, a moat means like the thing that protects you from competitors. And with software, the biggest thing that protects you from competitors, there's really two things. One, in general speaking, one is just the difficulty of building the same thing. Well, that's kind of gone now with AI. You can replicate most software. And the second thing is oftentimes it's like the place where all the data is housed and where you can actually do things with the data. So we're talking like, look at Salesforce, for example. Now, Salesforce, if you're a company that's been using Salesforce for 25 years, then you're going to have a situation where you're going to have all of your data in that product and your everyday workflow is into that product. So your sales team comes in the morning, they go into Salesforce, they open it up, and they work there. If you want to know what's going on with your deal flow, you go into Salesforce, you look at some dashboards, you can understand the breakdown of your deal flow. You know how many contacts are in different stages. You know how fast conversions are happening. You know all of these things, and it all happens inside of Salesforce. So that's an example where the data is there and the actual activity that you do with that data is there. So if you are building a competitive CRM, it's very hard to take somebody and take an enterprise and move them from Salesforce to you, even if you can make an argument that you have a better product, because the data and what they do with the data and their everyday workflow is already inside that other tool. But the issue now, and the reason that valuations now have tanked in many cases in software, is that this is no longer true. You can easily bring the data out of these tools. You can just simply export them in most cases. But more importantly, for any company that wants to, they can export all of their data and they can just use AI to do whatever they want with it. They can tell AI, build me a dashboard system, build me a workflow with this. They can just tell AI, hey, analyze this and tell me the outcome. Tell me where my deals are in their various stages and find missing deals that we can bring back to the table, people we haven't talked to in a while, and build me a dashboard and build me these charts or whatever, or build me a presentation for my board. They can do all of these things and they don't need, the Salesforce or the HubSpot or whatever it is. Now, for a lot of companies, they're going to stay with those products because they work, they're part of their workflow. There's no reason to leave. But when you look at like tech historically getting like a 20x valuation in the stock market versus revenue, that's going to change, because why would you need to value them that high when they can so easily be disrupted? And especially for newer companies coming up that haven't, gotten a CRM yet, or for bigger companies that want to make a strategic shift. They're no longer, it's a need to have to be in these programs. They can find other ways to deploy the functionality they need. So this is a huge disruption, and especially for a lot of software startups that started around like 2022, 2023, 2021 kind of era. I feel bad for a lot of these startups. Because I think they're in a really difficult spot. Like if you were in the middle of a growth stage right when AI really took off, depending on your space, depending on what your product is, you might be in a really bad position. And it's just the reality. So now when we look towards like what's being built, there's still a lot of space to deploy things for the enterprise, especially in software that does things like governance of data, or is something like a layer between the AI and the endpoint system, because there's a lot that needs to happen to take like the raw data and infrastructure of a company and bring it to actually being usable as an AI application. And so there's still a lot of space to build software. But I think anything that's like purely UI, or that anything that just builds its system based on needing you to use the interface is going to be a bit of an issue. So that whole mentality of, well, we're going to build a really nice interface and you're going to put your data in it and you're going to use it in a certain way is a major risk to be trying to start a company like that right now. And we're going to see, more and more change in how these are being deployed, how startups are raising funds and what they're investing in. Now, the other thing is that there's going to be a lot more hardware tech, because hardware, for obvious reasons, you can't just replicate it immediately. And so I think there's going to be a big pivot to hardware. And there's also going to be a big pivot to like service businesses. An agency or any type of service business that uses AI tech as part of its service is very compelling. It used to be that these companies had extremely low margins, and so they were bad investments. But now it's really a value add to say, like, you see it approached from two different ways. Sometimes you see companies pitching themselves as service businesses, and they just happen to use AI, and maybe that's a big part of their messaging or not, but it's still a service business with just AI that helps them. But what I'm seeing more and more common is companies that are product businesses, and you purchase software or execution products from them, products that, you press something or you tell us to do something and it gives you an outcome. So it's a proper product, but they're a whole service on the back end. So things like, we deploy AI agents for you, and you can browse the catalog and you can pick the AI agent and then say it's like human assisted. So there's actually a human on the back end that is executing or managing this agent. Now, the AI is still the product, but the human is assisting it. And so this is a really cool business to start, where operationally, in many ways, it's still like a service business, because you're hiring people to do services. But from a sales standpoint and from a pricing standpoint, it's a product business, because the company buys the product. And it also solves one of the biggest problems with agencies, where it's the account management, right? One of the biggest issues with running an agency is just like the day-to-day management of this customer. And if the customer, though, is interacting with the company only through the interface of a product, so like I'll give you an example, is you could have a company that does bookkeeping, but what they sell and what the customer buys is not a bookkeeping service, but a bookkeeping AI system. And this could look like a product. It could look like a dashboard. It could look like a chat interface. It could look like just about anything. But the point is that the company shops and purchases a proper product. But what could happen on the back end is that there could be a human that is making sure the product is sandboxed properly, and making sure that it's governed properly, making sure that the AI is just executing everything properly, that it's embedded with the right systems. Maybe it's a lot of connecting it to the different tools. So you can talk to the customer and say, oh, listen, you're working on QuickBooks and you get your invoices through your email, and You get your expenses on this other app. Okay, well, we're going to connect all these systems together so that the AI works. So that's the service side. But it's a really great business because you're deploying the product and then you have the service underneath, and there's a lot more resilience in this recurring revenue because it's really similar to like a software as a service. It's just doing much, much more. In many cases, it might be replacing a full-time hire or multiple full-time hires. And the price can be real low because most of it is done by the AI. You just need a human engineer that's like facilitating the connections and fixing things if things break and that sort of thing. So these types of businesses, I think, are also going to really take off. You're going to see a lot more investment going into these where they're service-enabled product businesses or product-enabled service businesses, and they use a lot of AI. So that's definitely where we're headed. Now, another couple things. Let's just touch on a couple more quick subjects here. Now, really interesting post I want to cover. Daniel Jeffries has this post from March 20th, and he's at Dan_Jeffries1 on X. And he has a really good perspective on OpenClaw that I've never heard that I think is really worth mentioning, which is that OpenClaw is kind of like the Napster moment for AI and for software in general. Because Napster came along and they said, we're going to make music digital and you can just get it on a digital format. Now, that was kind of an issue because the companies didn't want you to be able to do that. So all of the music companies didn't want it to be enabled in that way. But Napster forced it to happen. So then once everybody started expecting music to be digital, then you had Apple come along and say, okay, we'll let everyone buy $1 a song instead of having to buy a whole album. And the rest is history. Now music is digital and it's streaming and you pay a monthly rate, whatever. So now what Napster has, or the analogy now to OpenClaw, how Napster is similar to OpenClaw, or how OpenClaw is similar to Napster, is that OpenClaw basically said, we are going to enable people to talk to the AI on any system, whether it's Telegram, iMessage, WhatsApp, Discord, Slack, whatever, wherever they want. And we're going to connect it to whatever systems you want. So I can have it check my iMessages and give me a summary of them delivered to me on Telegram. And what this shows is that this is what people want. I mean, the people that are kind of leading the trend here, what we all want is to be able to just open a phone or talk into a pin or whatever it is and just instruct my apps to do what I tell them and have them communicate with each other. Each of the software layers don't want this. If you're WhatsApp, if you're any particular system, if you're Gmail, you don't want to just enable this endpoint that everyone is no longer even going into your app. They're just talking to their AI and their AI is doing everything. Most websites, are blocking AI apps or any kind of robots coming in and using them and doing things inside of them. But this is what humans want. And at least the ones that are leading the trend. And I think this is the direction we're headed in. And so in many ways, OpenClaw has forced companies to start moving and thinking in this direction. And we'll see how that develops and how quickly it develops. But I think it's somewhat inevitable that every company is going to have to open up API endpoints and AI systems are going to talk and communicate with all of them. AI systems are going to have to be going into websites. So maybe there's going to be a way where you can prevent like mass robots and scraping and things, but websites are going to have to find a way that if my personal AI assistant wants to go access the website, it can't be blocked by a prove you're a human type authentication system. So the technology is going to have to evolve to where the AI assistants can access every website and do everything on them and not be blocked. And it's just going to have to go in that direction. So I do think it's a really good point, and I love that take. And I wanted to end with that. And we'll see you in the next episode.